All right, so today we're going to do lab 2. I'm going to record it where we all can look at it again. If you haven't already, you might want to open the PDF where you can read it. And go ahead and get idle open. I'm going to try to do both these screens next to each other. We'll see how it works. I did go ahead and change the font size, so if you guys can't see it in the back, let me know and I'll change it again. Sound like a deal? Okay. All right, so ignore the due date at the top of this one. I obviously put the wrong PDF in there and didn't put the updated one in there that took the date off. It is due whatever CourseDen says it's due, not what my bad editing says it's due. It's obviously not June. So we're going to start at the beginning. I've already done A, I've already started idle. I've already created a file over here that has the file name as my first and last name in lab 2. Please put your name in the file name. It's awfully hard to decide whose code is whose if your name's not in it. Yeah, I'll give you a minute or two to get that done, and then we will start with part E, or part 1, letter B. I'm going to read it. All right, everybody got the file made? Unless you just walked in. All right, so let's read through part 1 before we get started where we don't miss anything. So on the first line of the lab 2 Python file you created, type the following comment. It even tells you what comments to use. Part 1, average miles per hour. Remember that comments start with the hash sign or the pound key or the number symbol, whatever you want to call it. Then we want to prompt the user for the total number of miles they drove. So we need a variable to hold the information, and then we need to ask the user to give us the information. So oddly enough, this is just like what we did last week, right? So we're going to call it miles equals, oops. We're going to make shorter prompts or have a bigger screen. Step 3 is the value the user entered is returned as a string, and it needs to be converted to a float so that we can do math with it. Convert the miles variable, which is stored as a string, to a float by adding the following command. So we're going to do miles. It's going to be equal to float miles. So what that does, like we said in class before, is everything on the right-hand side happens first before it's placed into the variable on the left-hand side of the equal sign. So the first thing it's going to do is run the float command, the float function on the variable, which converts it to a float. And then it places it back into miles. So we're going to override the string with a number. Yeah.
So I have a question. When you say converts it into a float, what exactly do you mean by that? Because like when you prompt the user with how many miles something and put in.
Yeah, so when you prompt it them and they put in a number, the input function is designed where it reads it as 2 characters or 3 characters instead of a number. So like I've told you in class, your mailbox number is not really a number, it's a location or a string. So same thing here, it reads it in as more of a string of digits than something you can do math with. Why does it do that? Because most of the stuff you're doing on the keyboard are characters, so you're more likely to need it to be a string than a number. Also, they'd have to write several different functions to read in the different data types. This way is on the programmer to convert it to what they need. Not all programming languages handle it that way, but that's how Python handles it. All right, so I've converted it, and if I want to test and make sure I converted it, I obviously can run it. Or we can keep moving. But if I put in a print line right here, because remember, I like testing with print lines, and I print out miles, and I also could do the print, and remember there was a type function. Remember? So if I run it and test it, I could put in 56.2. If I turn on the number lock, 56.2, and it's a float. And I can take the float conversion out and prove to you that it's a string if you want me to. Want me to do that? So if I commented this line out and ran it, and I wrote 52, now it's a string. I'm all about proving it to you. So let's take that out before I forget, because we definitely want to be able to do math. I don't need these print statements anymore, so I'm going to remove them. You can leave them and comment them if you want to. It doesn't matter either way. So we've done step 1, step 2, step 3. Let's go to step 4. As part of iterative incremental development, we should test the code we've written. Hey, I just did that. To do this, we'll do diagnostic print statements, which I just did. You could add in something a little clearer than what I did and actually give it like a prompt that says print miles driven. And once you're done with it, remove it. So I actually did 4 before we got there because my brain just automatically jumps to print statements. So what I just erased was step 4. Everybody follow me? So let's jump down to 5. Prompt the user for the number of hours by adding the following code. And then almost immediately, I know I have to convert it because it's a number we're going to want to do some math with. So I'm going to go ahead and do step 6 and convert it to a float. And it gives you a screenshot of what the code should look like so far. And mine looks oddly just like it. Yours should too. If you left your print statements in there and commented them out, it's okay too. As long as they don't run when you grade them, right? So part 7, it wants us to print and see if that works. So right? Boy, that's gonna be a bad miles per hour if I did 56 miles in 4 hours, right? The math's coming. All right, so we know it works. I can get rid of this line now. I'm just gonna comment it out just because that way we know we did it. It's easier for you to know if you did this stuff by commenting out your print statements. That's fine. Feel free. All right, the last step is to compute and display the miles per hour. So how do we calculate miles per hour? You take the total number of miles driven and you divide it by the number of hours you drove, and that should give you the miles you drove per hour. So I'm going to create a new variable called MPH, which stands for miles per hour. And I'm going to divide the miles by the hours. And then I need to display that for our users. Now, I did something that they didn't do in the screenshot. I added a space between averaged and my quotation marks, and a space between the quotation marks and MPH over here in the green to make it more readable. Because if I had left those 2 spaces out, it would have just put the number with no spaces into the string, and it would have just made it harder to read. So 9 wants us to test it, and it gave us some values to test it with, so you know if it's accurate or not. So run. So if I put in 400 miles and I drove 8 hours, I averaged 50 miles per hour on my trip, right? If I run it again with different numbers, because you always should test it more than once, I can put in the 640.5, and then I did 10.8 hours, and I got 59.3055555555. Because float numbers are going to fill in all of its significant digits. It doesn't do the rounding for you. We'll talk about formatting and rounding to number decimal places a little later in the class. Questions? Cool. So we've done all of part B, or part 1. So let's do C, which is part 2. I'm going to have to relabel all these. So this one, we're going to do the length of a name. We talked about how strings were objects, and there were some methods that worked on objects. Well, one of the things a string always knows is how long it is. It knows how many characters it has, including spaces. So if I put it on a sentence, it's going to count all the characters, the punctuation, the spaces, everything. So we're going to put in another comment to show that we're starting part 2. Do you have to have the comments? Yes, because I want you to get in the habit of writing comments. Do they have to say word for word what they say in the prompt? No, but general gist of it. And I'm not checking your spelling in comments. All right, so put in the comment, add a line of code that prompts the user for his or her first name and assign it to a variable for first name. So it doesn't tell you what the variable name has to be, so you get to make your own variable names at this point. You can make it first underscore name. Absolutely. Very readable, very usable. I am lazy, so I'm going to make it first. And I was very clear in my prompt that I wanted their first name, because if I just said enter your name, I might have got first name last. I might have got nickname, right? And then I need a line of code that prompts the user for his or her middle name. And then guess what? The next one asks me to prompt for the last name. So I need 2 more lines that look almost identical to this. So I need middle. So steps 2, 3, and 4 should look like that. A variable, a prompt, a variable, a prompt, variable, a prompt. Make sure the variables are clear enough that you can tell the difference between your data, but otherwise I don't care what you name it. Yes, sir.
What is the colon for at the end of the name?
Make it look pretty.
So
That's
you-
what's going to display on the screen. I did it just to make it look nice. So when I run it, it's like punctual. Like this has a question mark, so it just gives me a pretty little space and to makes the cursor more visible so the user knows it's waiting on you to enter a name. So right. So it's taken all the information, but we haven't done anything with it yet. So let's go back and do something with it. So we're on step 5. So it wants us to print out the first, middle, and last name that the user entered. So and I'm just building a prompt because it makes it clearer. Oh, okay. Oh, so I'm gonna do something that I should have done earlier. I'm gonna scroll down. If you look here, this is an example of what you should see when it runs. So we asked for enter that. It didn't say in the directions, but it wants you to print all 3 on the same line. So I was just going to automatically do that, but I figured I better point that out to you, because you could read this and go, oh, I'm going to do 3 print lines. First name, last name, first name, middle name, last name. But what they really want is all 3 on the same line. And people that ask for programs to be developed often aren't clear with the directions, but they are sometimes clear with what they want as output. So sometimes you have to put both together to get what you need to code. So I'm gonna give it a prompt because it just looks prettier. Really need to learn to type today. Now, you don't have to put the prompt in the, I mean, the display in there if you don't want to. I do it just to make it look right out when I read through it, that that's what I was intending to do. Inside of print statement, you're gonna use plus signs, right? So let's run it and see if that works. Actually, you're not using plus signs. That's Java. Commas. Oh my gosh, commas. I taught Java yesterday afternoon. It was plus signs. Hey, Python, commas. So separate each piece with a comma on what you want to print out. Now let's run it and it should work the way we intended. And the spaces look really big for me because I have the font size so big. Is everybody with me so far? Great. So we go back over here. All right, so we did number 5. Number 6 is print out the length of the first name. Example output is length of first name, and then X is where whatever the value is going to be. So the code we use to get the length is actually down here. So if you did the reading, you read about it, but we haven't done it in class yet. So we're going to do it real quick. So I want to print, not pint, print. Now, you can absolutely do it inside the print statement, right? So you could do len, which is short for length, and the variable first. And this absolutely is going to give you the length of the first name. Once it gives it to you and prints it out, the next time you need it, you have to use that function again, right? So if you know you're going to use it more than once, you could put a second line of code in that stores that piece of information for you. You could create a variable that's length first and put it in there. Not necessary for what we're doing today, but you could. So if I do this and run it, and if you don't want to test all the stuff you already know works, you can comment out part 1 until you get ready to turn it in. Just don't forget to uncomment it before you turn it in. So I put in my name, it printed it all out. The length of the first name is 6 because Tracy has 6 characters. And then you're going to do the same thing for the middle name and your last name, and then you're going to do a total. So it's tempting to copy and paste that line 3 times. or 2 more times, right? And then just change first to middle and then change it to last. And that absolutely is your prerogative if you want to do that. Just be careful if you do that, that you don't forget to change the variable names or the prompt names, because it's very easy to get in a hurry and forget to do that. I've done it more than once. And then my math doesn't work because I forgot to change first to middle and whatever. So you can type it, you can copy it. I'm going to copy and paste it for quickness. And then I'm going to change first, middle on this line. And I'm going to change first to last on this line. But the challenge is, how am I going to get the length of all 3? Well, if I just stored them in variables, I could have just added the variables together, but I didn't. So I can do this. So make this bigger where you can see the whole line at one time. So I can call the function for each one of those and add them together and I put them inside of parentheses where it does all the math at one time, right? Probably don't absolutely need the parentheses because it would have done the math anyway, but I like parentheses because it makes me feel better that I've written everything. We're good. So let's run this and see if that worked. Oops, I didn't close parentheses. Oh, yep. So this one goes with this one. This one right here goes with this one. And then, of course, this goes with this one. So you have a lot of parentheses at the end. Because you haven't closed one, means you probably need to add. So now let's try. Actually, I'm surprised that's the first error I've run into today. So now it totaled it up to 19. Tracy has 6 characters in it. My maiden name Nichols has 7 in it. My last name Wilson has 6 in it. Yeah, math kind of comes out right. Questions? Okay. So there is another way of doing this. Like I said, you can put it in variables. Do you want me to show you how to do that? Or are you okay with what I just did? You'd like to know? Absolutely. Did you have a question? Okay. So I could have also, instead of doing it this way, I'm gonna comment these lines out for right now. I could have up here gone link. Can't spell. And now, if I do it that way, it gets the link and it stores it in the variable. And when I come down to the print lines, instead of putting the command here, I could just put right? And same for these. But I can't spell length to save my life this morning. And then this one would be. And when I get down to the very bottom one, let's move it up the screen somewhere. You can see it better in the back. If I get down here to the bottom one, instead of calling the functions, I could just do let's see if it works without the parentheses. I think it will. Yeah, I'm making up names now. Oops. Hey, look, I can't spell length. And I picked a different name where it have different numbers. So y'all, you see that there was 2 ways to do it. Both are equally correct. That's something you need to learn or to accept about programming is your code will not look exactly like your neighbor's code. And the next neighbor over's code may even look a completely different way from the 2 of you. Because it's how your brain puts the logic together and how you coded it. That's the reason when I say I will be able to tell if you copy and pasted your neighbor's code, because you will learn and develop your own coding style. It's kind of like writing an English paper. After I read enough of your code, I'll be able to go, huh, they didn't write that. Right? So definitely seek out help from me, the lab assistants. Ask your neighbor if they see where your syntax error is or where you misspelled something. But don't hand your neighbor a thumb drive with all your code on it, because you will eventually get caught. And then we will have to do disciplinary actions. Just like English. All right. Questions? So guess what? That's the end of this lab. That's all lab 2 was. So in workshop tomorrow, I'm going to take questions on assignment 2. So I'm going to pull up the thing for assignment 2, and I'm just going to read through it with you today. So you can go home and start working on it if you want to and answer any questions. But while I'm doing that, if you just wrote all this code, please go to CourseDen and submit it before you forget, or before you leave and it's saved to this machines inside the lab and they get overwritten. So I have that other file open somewhere. There it is. So again, ignore the due dates. I obviously missed this week when I updated the files. So this one wants you to compute the average price of 3 vehicles. Everybody know how to get the average of a number. So you're gonna add the 3 prices together and then divide them by 3. All right, so pretty similar to what we just did in the lab. You're gonna input for prices. Since you need 3 of them, you're gonna put the input up there 3 times. You're going to store them in 3 separate variables, because if you store them in the same variable, it just overrides it every time, so you won't have 3 numbers to add together. So you might make a variable called price 1, price 2, price 3, or car 1, car 2, car 3, something like that. Once you get those the input, don't forget to convert it to float, because we're dealing with money and numbers. So you need decimal places, right? Make sure you're testing to make sure it works. The example in here is they use price 1, 2, and 3 as their variables, but like I said, you can make your own variable names as long as you remember what you made them throughout the entire program. The next part is a weighted average, and it gives you the formula for the weighted average. What's the difference between an average and a weighted average? Just like me giving you categories saying that your tests are going to be counted more than your labs. So what you're going to do is you're going to find out, you're going to prompt the user for 2 assignment grades, 3 quiz grades, and 2 test grades. And based on this equation, you're going to come in with the averages. This is good practice for all those classes you're going to have here at the university, where the teacher tells you what the formula for figuring your grade is, but then won't tell you what your average is. They send you off to do it yourself. This way you can keep up with what your average is as you go, as long as you keep up with your grades. Because I'm going to tell you, CourseSten's average is not always correct, because it sometimes calculates zeros in for uncompleted assignments, things that aren't due yet. They're showing in the grade book, show up as zeros in some of the averages. So being able to calculate your own average will be more accurate sometimes. All right, so we're going to do that weighted average, and that'll be the 2 parts for assignment 2. We will work on this in workshop, or you will work on this in workshop. I will answer questions in workshop. If you do this tonight at home and it 100% works, you are not required to come to workshop.
Workshop? What is workshop?
Friday. The Friday class is workshop, and it's for you to do lab work, and for me and the TA to answer questions, and for the online students to jump on the Zoom call if they want to ask questions in real time. All right, so